Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Amanda Brock, CEO at OpenUK, and it's a great honour to have been invited to join you today at Open Source Lisbon to give a keynote about Brexit, the open frontier. When I was invited to join Open Source Lisbon almost a year ago now and deliver a keynote, I was looking forward to coming to Lisbon in September and spending a few days in your beautiful city, hanging out with many of our friends across open source. And I'm absolutely gutted, rather than to be in your beautiful city with you all, to be sitting here in London on a cold November day talking to you from my kitchen. My cat just did a fly past and no doubt will be joining me at some point on this talk. Not a treat that you would normally get face to face, but I'm still very, very disappointed not to have the opportunity to be with you in Lisbon. And I very much hope that this time next year, or worst case scenario 2022, we'll all be able to be back together and breaking bread together and having the opportunity to talk about open source in a collaborative way. So before I start to talk about Brexit, which is obviously extremely topical to us in the UK and to everybody across Europe right now, I'd like to just spend a few minutes talking to you about OpenUK, the organisation that I'm the CEO of. We've got a bit of a red flash going on here on my screen. I hope that's not too distracting for you. With a bit of luck, it will calm down in a second. So I joined OpenUK almost exactly a year ago, 11 months ago, in fact, and I joined having just moved back from Amsterdam, where I lived for a couple of years. I was asked to join and to become part of the board and run the organisation. And I really wasn't that interested, to be quite honest. My initial reaction was no, on the basis that I had worked for almost 20 years internationally, lived in other countries, and very much viewed myself as somebody who was an international collaborator and enjoyed that kind of work and interaction. But as I watched things unfold back in the UK, my mind was changed, and I joined Open UK, as I say, almost a year ago, and almost immediately brought on board a fabulous board of 12 internationally recognised individuals who had a broad understanding of open and broad interests and aspirations. And by January, remarkably, they had set the vision, strategy and mission for Open UK. And our vision is to develop and sustain UK leadership in open technology. Now, that's not an inward-looking, narrow vision. That vision is, in fact, one that involves lots of international collaboration and participation with people all over the globe. They also set the definition not of open source software, but of open technology. Now, if you haven't heard the term open technology before, I suggest that you look out for it and keep it in mind, because you're going to hear it again and again. And open technology is open source software, open hardware, and open data. The three opens, as John Laban, who you're going to hear from later today, calls them. Now, John's definition of the three opens, in fact, sets up what we believe is the future of technology and innovation, and that any of the open projects you look at will fit within one of those definitions. We worked on a number of projects over the last 11 months, different work groups, committees, and what we discovered very quickly was that our work fits clearly into three strong pillars, and those are community, legal and policy, and learning. And for the first of those, for community, we wanted to build a loud and visible voice, a single voice that could be heard across the UK, both in terms of our domestic interaction and our international aspirations. Well, that community is across the UK, all parts of the UK, and covers the three opens. So people from hardware, people from software, people from data. What we find, and I don't think this is specific to the UK, is that we work so globally as an open community that we often know other people who have the same interest or are involved in the same project, but perhaps we don't know our neighbours. The pandemic has definitely accelerated that geographical focus, that looking local, as we find ourselves locked down at home. We're here in London in day 2 of lockdown. And I've discovered in the last few months that in the area in London that I live in, there's a number of people from the open communities who I now see geographically, see locally, as opposed to seeing my colleagues all over the world. So I think it's critical, not just in the UK, but everywhere, to build those local connections and strengthen our geographical communities. And for the UK, that was particularly important with Brexit. And I will come back to that later because it is the meat of my talk. And the way that we're building that community is through a number of ways, creating interaction, engagement, and supporting the work that the communities already do. We are in the process of building an ambassador program where we will bring on board supporters. Supporters will be individuals who subscribe to the organisation and are able to vote in our elections and stand for the board positions. However, those supporters are not the only people that can participate. Anybody who wants to participate in Open UK can. It's not a pay-to-play organisation. This year, in our very first year, we had 84 nominations for awards, and almost 150 digital attendees joined me and Imogen Heap as we hosted the evening. Imogen has been a big supporter of our kids competition, as I'll mention in a moment, and it was a fabulous opportunity for us to get together. And we're also doing work on a museum exhibit on open source, bringing community together to create a room for the National Computer Museum at Bletchley Park. So with that loud and visible community, what we want to do is make sure that the UK itself is a great place to do open. And we do that through legal and policy. And this was perhaps the easiest area because we have so many really established people in this field in the UK already. We found it very easy to gain traction. By February, the UK government had invited us to speak to the trade negotiators, the people doing the Brexit negotiations who were looking at source code provisions in the treaties. We supported OSOR, the Commission's Observatory, in their review of the state of open in the UK and the report on that. We set up a future leaders group because we were so conscious that we had a very good group of people, but looking around the room, none of us were young anymore. Not quite sure how that happened, but we wanted to engage with the younger community and develop them into the roles that we're in today, tomorrow. And that future leaders group have been very active. They've been analysing the government procurement processes and the terms and conditions, and they're almost there with a report which will culminate in a government workshop. I believe we're the only organisation out of the US that submitted an amicus brief in Google v Oracle, copyright litigation that will have an impact that will be definitely global. And we've continued to review in a reactive way new laws and policy. I think our most recent consultation input was on the Digital Services Act with the European Commission. Obviously, the UK is gradually moving from a status of being in the EU to being rest of world, but it doesn't stop us having an input. And that input's very important when we are geographically still within Europe and, of course, very close to our neighbours in terms of trading. We also do a number of policy projects where we are trying to shape how the UK will be and shape the policies. And we're involved in 5G, Open RAN Cloud and circular economy. And I just wanted to go back to that OSCE report, as well as us supporting them. We were very privileged to be named by the Commission as the actor, the strategic player in the UK, advocating for the use of open technologies, including open source software. That was a real privilege. And the third pillar is learning. So if we have this visible, loud community in a country that's a good place to do open, we need to ensure that we have the workforce of the future. And we have done that initially through a kids competition, which morphed due to the pandemic into a digital summers camp. And we're currently working on curriculum, building an exam for 16-year-olds, which we hope will go into the national curriculum available through schools and colleges in 2022 across the UK. And also creating something called a knowledge module, which is a component part of apprenticeship schemes for those following a non-academic route. And we also have a universities group covering tertiaries education. Our kids competition gained a huge amount of traction. You may well have seen it in social media. We use something called the Mini Moo glove based on Imogen Heap's My Moo software glove. And created a kids course that supported that, which was then released in a summer camp along with e-zines. We gave away over 3,000 of these glove kits across the UK, creating digital inclusion and allowing children who might otherwise not have been able to do the course to do it. And in each episode of that course, there was a 1-minute learning about open source, giving an introduction. I'm delighted to say we've secured funding for 2021 and we'll be running a second competition. We will also be running a second kids camp. We will rerun the first one and we'll run the second one in June next year, June, July next year. And what I'm hoping is that we will also be able to work with people in Europe and we will be able to provide the course in other languages, including Portuguese, French, Spanish and German. That's our aspiration. And you will, I hope, have picked up from that whilst we're an organisation that looks geographically at the UK, we're not an inward-looking organisation. We have joined a number of international organisations and have representation across them, including Eclipse, Linux Foundation, the Open Source Initiative, a number of open hardware initiatives and organisations too. Some of you in Europe may have heard before of Ditto, Developing the Open, an open healthcare project that we're part of, providing governance support. And then from my perspective, I don't just work for OpenUK. Technically, I work for OpenUK part-time. Anybody who knows me well would tell you that you wouldn't know that. But I also have a role with the Open Invention Network, the world's biggest defensive patent pool. It's something I'm really deeply passionate about. If your organisation is not part of Open Invention Network, it should be. It's the world's biggest defensive IP organisation in all of history. It has now over 3,000 members, almost 3,500 members, who are all working together to support open source through patent non-aggression. I'm the chair of the advisory group for the United Nations Technology and Innovation Labs, and I sit on a number of other advisory boards, including the ACES Open Projects Advisory and the KDE Advisory Board. I'm also, for my sins, the editor of a book to come out next year, Free and Open Source Law, Policy and Practice, which covers around 20 different areas of open, from the copyright, patents, other intellectual property, through contracts, commercial models, foundations. I'm really proud to say that thanks to the Veitch Foundation, the book will not only be available through Oxford University Press, but it will be available open access, and I hope that you will all benefit from that. The last thing I do is this, and I spend a lot of my life talking at conferences. Sadly, at the moment, as I said, not meeting people, but usually meeting people all over the world. So I suppose I'm a bit of an open source advocate. Now, how did a nice girl like me end up in a space like open source? Well, having spent over 15 years of my career in-house working as a lawyer, I took a role at the beginning of 2008 with a company called Canonical. I'm sure you've heard of it, Europe's biggest open source company at the time. And I became really embedded in the community at Canonical and around Ubuntu and some of our other projects, and realized that this was something that actually was very emotive to me and something that became a true passion. And since then, although I've worked in other sectors like fintech and data center, I have always kept my interest in open source, and have continuously worked on open source projects. So as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, I wasn't interested when I was first approached about OpenUK, and it was Brexit that changed that for me. And that's what I wanted to talk a bit about today. But of course, Brexit is a first step, the first obvious step, because it's about to happen in a geopolitical shift that's affecting not only all of us as citizens and our states that we live in, but also technology and inevitably open source. You may have seen this picture before on social media. It's from the 31st of January from FOSDEM. And as many of you will know, the UK left the European Union on 31st January 2020 at midnight. This photograph is probably 2 seconds after midnight, and I'm with 3 other people who are involved in OpenUK. Jonathan Riddle, who's the chair of our awards committee, Kavita Kapoor, who leads our learning, she's the chief learning officer, and our good friend Cheryl Hung from CNCF. And we're actually outside the Commission at the very moment we left the EU because we were attending FOSDEM. the biggest developer conference in Europe. We spent the next day giving away 1,000 biscuits, tea and biscuits with the Brits. You can look forward to a similar online interactive event this year, or next year, I should say, 2021. But for 2020, it was very important to us to be part of that European community and to share with our colleagues all over the world. And frankly, our political views individually are absolutely irrelevant at this stage. The UK is leaving the European Union. It's a fact. It's what we're now dealing with and have been for some time. And from that perspective, we could sit back and complain and grumble, or we could look at this for what it is, which is an opportunity. And it's an opportunity for us to develop internally, domestically, but also for us to collaborate more and more with people all over the world. And for OpenUK, it's an opportunity for us really to focus in making ourselves something worth collaborating with, creating an environment for open where others will want to work with us and invest in the UK, but also where we will produce some of the best people in the world, I hope, to collaborate across the three opens. Now, you might be surprised at my change in tact, but I've already mentioned to you that Brexit is the first step of many that we are seeing across the globe at the moment. And Europe is an important factor in that. I'm recording this talk in advance, as you know, and I'm recording it without the benefit of hearing Geese and the European Commission representative who are keynoting before me. I'm sure they'll have given you excellent talks. They're good people, and I'm sure they will also be talking about collaboration and the need for us all to continue to collaborate globally and not to allow political impact to affect our ability to be an open, collaborative technology community. Yesterday, we saw the preview of the European Commission's study on the impact of open source. And I was really proud to see Andrew Katz, the General Counsel at OpenUK, be one of the leaders collaborating with colleagues across Europe to deliver that. Now, this is partly responsible for my views on Brexit and why I wanted to be involved in OpenUK. Because a year ago, I'd seen, or over a year ago, I saw the work the Commission was doing, which led to their two-day workshop last November, which in turn led to this report and their recent policy on open source, all of which is very positive towards open source. And I wanted to be part of the movement in the UK that makes sure that we don't get left behind, that Europe doesn't forget about us or the European Union, I should say, doesn't forget about us because we're sat across the water and no longer part of that political and economic union, but instead sit as a neighbour in Europe, very keen to collaborate. So at least in a technology perspective and across open source. I can't speak for anybody else, but I can definitely say that is the case across open. So I wanted to help influence making sure that the UK goes down a similar line, and we're working very hard on a legal and policy level to make sure that that's the case, and to make sure that what we do creates world-class open source. And as I said, it's not just the UK and Brexit that's creating this geopolitical shift. This is a global phenomena. Brexit is the first step. We've seen over the last 6 months, and very much accentuated and accelerated by the pandemic, the shift in Europe where we have a move towards digital sovereignty and data sovereignty. I don't often use a slide with a lot of words on it. You may already have noticed that. But there's a couple here. And this one is a letter, or a quote from a letter in 2019 from Ursula von der Leyen as she takes her presidency of the European Union to Margaret Vestager. And Margaret Vestager is, of course, known for her role as a hunter of big tech as the European Commission lead for many years. And Vestager says, changes in digital technologies and geopolitics are already having a profound effect on the lives of Europeans. We are witnessing major shifts all the way from global power structures to local politics. What we do now will determine what kind of world our children live in and will define Europe's place in the world. And what she's driving towards is the creation of a Europe fit for the digital age. Now, I think for everybody who's watching this anywhere in the world, if you were to replace the word Europeans, the word Europes, and the word Europe with your home country, whether it was British, the UK's and UK, or Chinese, China's and China, or the Americans, the US's and US, the same statement will ring true for all of us. The decisions that we make now at this point in technological development are going to impact what kind of world our children live in, whether they're in Europe, whether they're in the US, China, the UK, or anywhere in the world. We're at a pivot point. And that pivot point is very clearly demonstrated with this geopolitical shift and the friction that we're seeing. And one of the reasons for that is data. Another is, of course, the rise of the big tech companies. And as we see data become what is often referred to as the new gold or the new oil, and businesses become increasingly focused on data-based strategies across commerce and across sectors, not just tech, which has been aware of this for longer, I would say, than the other sectors. We see government and the state also move to understand the relevance and role of the citizens' data, for the need for some level of control, the desire for a data or digital sovereignty, and the need for a strategy. In the UK, our strategy came out in early September, but it's still going through a consultation process. We don't expect to see the full strategy until early next year, which was Brexit. I almost said breakfast. I can't believe that. It's a classic problem with anybody talking about Brexit. So with Brexit going on, the European strategy on data is a little ahead of ours, but I'm sure it won't be dissimilar. And that includes covering strong concerns that have been raised over the economic and social influence of non-EU technology companies, which threaten EU citizens' control over their personal data and constrains both the growth of EU high technology companies and the ability of national and EU rulemakers to enforce their laws. I'm sure you've already come across this high technology term, which is the EU's reference to big tech, or their equivalent of big tech. Now, when we look at this again could swap with anywhere in the world. Every country is becoming concerned about its citizens' data and how that data, which is vastly more exposed online than it's ever been, which is used increasingly in our technology-driven services to generate revenue, and which is subject, because of the internationalization and the shifts and movements of data, and due to recent, relatively recent at least, regulation, potentially subject to the laws of other governments and surveillance of other governments. This is something that could be written by any state, not just Europe. You could easily see this coming out of China or the US. But the Europeans have been very transparent, and I admire that. And if you look at July's EPRS briefing paper on this digital sovereignty and digital strategy, they're very clear in what they want to do. I would recommend, if you haven't read this, wherever you are in the world, that you do. And as we get towards the end of it, you'll see the word open is highlighted in the top left-hand corner there. And what they're looking for is to make online platform ecosystems and online activities more open. Openness is absolutely critical to them. And you'll see further down that avoiding technology lock-ins will be possible by fostering it open. And yet it will still be secure in those digital ecosystems. And that's really important. That place of open being acknowledged so strongly by the Europeans is something that I hope we will see soon within the UK also. And the report goes on to set out a number of possible actions. And at 23, you see fostering an open digital ecosystem, something that's obviously dear to my heart. The first of the actions was to create a cloud for Europe, and we've seen that with Gaia X. Their conference a week today on the 18th of November, I'm sure, will be full of interesting announcements. But here we see the French and German governments and a number of companies across Europe aligning to build a federated data infrastructure or cloud for Europe. Interestingly, when asked on a call by John Laban, who will be speaking to you later today, who is one of our OpenUK directors, they confirmed that it will all be built on open source. It's not surprising that it will all be built on open source, because without open source, it wouldn't be possible for that kind of infrastructure to be built in any way that's economic or at any pace. The second activity was around data, and we saw a week or so ago in Politico that there was a leak of a new proposed EU regulation, which is supposed to be coming out on the 11th of November, today's date, the date of this conference, and it will be interesting to see where that goes. But the leak certainly confirms that sensitive data will not be able to be transferred out of the EU bloc. So sitting in the UK, we will not be part of that. And we're seeing more and more division around data, whether that is with the UK, the US, or China. And as I said, lastly, there, China, because it's not just the US, it's also China that the EU is taking a defensive approach to. We see the same issues with China coming out of the US. Anybody following any level of politics in the last 12 months could not help but see that. And you notice below the main picture here, win or lose, Trump has already changed the world. At the point of my recording this, we don't know if Trump has won or lost, but whichever of the contenders is president, there's certainly going to be a rift with China there. That's not going to change. So part of the Commission and the European Union's process has been through the European Court, where we saw Schrems 2, a second lawsuit brought by Max Schrems, where the adequacy of the US was challenged as a place that data could be transferred to from the EU. And as we see Schrems have an impact, the European countries' individual information commissioners need to make a decision about how that will work, and the need for an adequacy test or an adequacy provision and audit to be made on any arrangement with a supplier in the US. Now, initially, Schrems covers the US. There is nothing to let us know whether or not it will go further, and whether over time we will see other countries' adequacy of their data protection and privacy provisions challenged by the EU. And that's something that's obviously very important to us in the UK, where currently we are GDPR compliant, and we have data flows from Europe to the UK as a day-to-day part of business. And the UK's positioning on that, which will also come out of the National Data Strategy early next year, is going to be critical. And it's going to be critical in how we open up data and we interact with other countries. We've also seen this year, back in July, that the UK took Huawei out of the 5G infrastructure on a go-forward basis. Now, I've mentioned open source a bit here because if we look at Gaia X, I've no doubt whatsoever that Gaia X could not be built in the way that it needs to be and at the pace it needs to be to create a cloud for Europe without open source. This is a little thing that a chap called Dan Cohn, who sadly passed away unexpectedly last week, created. I wanted to put it into my deck as a bit of a tribute to Dan, who's a great leader in our community, but also because it is a really effective document which helps to show the scale of open source. And you're looking at 1,500 cards, you're looking at billions in market investment and trillions in market capitalization in the value of the software that's sitting under the cloud, sitting under the public cloud. No government in their right mind would try and recreate that in closed source. The internet is not dissimilar. So what we are seeing is this geopolitical shift actually impacting tech for a number of reasons. Primarily of interest is the fact that the geopolitical shift is around data, is around cloud, is around technology, is around digital sovereignty, is around data sovereignty. And all of that creates things like the bifurcation of the internet in Asia and a cloud for Europe, all of which is only possible with open source. And this open source, what is it? Well, obviously it's code, but it's code that's been created by the collaboration and work of individuals across the globe. Those individuals have pulled together, creating international teams without discrimination, without bias, and that diversity is what makes open truly what it is today. It's not a question of a license alone and whether or not one can find a clever lawyer who can find a loophole that says it's okay not to collaborate globally. Fundamentally, the essence of open source is that global collaboration and the creation of code from it. And that creation of code in that way, without discrimination, without exclusion, is what's allowed the best software in the world to be produced to create these tools that can be utilised today, not just by business, but also by government. So I'm going to leave you with a thought. And the thought I'm going to leave you with is that it's not just code, it's about individuals. It's about the collective, and it's about collaboration. There is lots and lots of opportunity for the UK as a consequence of Brexit, and I plan very much to be part of that with OpenUK, not just creating the opportunity domestically, but working with our colleagues and our friends across open source across the globe. And that's really what we want to see together, because as we hit the first of these geopolitical shifts that's carved in stone with Brexit, we will then see the beginning of a cascade, a waterfall that needs to remain agile and alive for us as a community to collaborate, to continue to produce the best code in the world that will allow future governments to rely on the infrastructure that we create. I hope the talk's been useful. I'm going to be around to answer any questions, and thank you very much for having me.